Hi, I'm Colin Deggan of BG Networks.
Hi, I'm Roman Lysecki.
Eric Pettis, BG Networks.
And on our bi-weekly live stream today, we have a very special guest.
Milton Yarberry from ICS.
It's great. Great. Milton, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, Milton is here.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And he's here to talk about SBOMs and lead us through I think, a very interesting conversation on such an important part of the FDA guidance for cybersecurity for medical devices. But first, as we always do, we start off with some news. And Roman has decided to test us to figure out if we can guess some CVE severity scores. I'm not sure what the prize is going to be yet. Roman, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, so there is an interesting alert that came out from CISA a few weeks ago. And since then, it's been a little bit evolving as people have tried to investigate and understand what it actually is. So your job will be to guess the CVSS score based upon the vulnerabilities that are part of that. And it comes down to two GitHub Action software. One was called TJ Actions, changed files. So TJ Actions, this is meant to be a process that if you're using GitHub to do like an automated deployment as part of a CI process, it was specifically tracking any files and directories that have changed in a branch that you want to be able to do something with. So there's a way to easily track what actually changed and put that into the actions that you're doing. And so this was the first area where somebody had discovered something that was going wrong, which was there was a commit to that TJ Actions, which put in a payload that would leak the secret keys you were using as part of that action. It was logging those into another file that somebody could then basically pull out of there. So this could be if you had GitHub personal access tokens in there, if you had NPN tokens, maybe you had private RSA keys used for signing something. Those were being leaked as part of that, so an attacker could steal those secrets. So that's where it started. But it turned out to be much more complex than that because it involved another GitHub action called review dog action setup, which was meant to be a way to take reviewing from like a linting tool that would do checks on your code and be able to instrument those as comments inside a commit in your repository. It was linked to a review dog implementation trying to figure out what was the sequence by which it actually created this attack. And so you know, stop me if I'm going too deep on this, but I think it's relevant to our conversation today around SBOMs. The sequence by which this happened, so the TJ Actions was where it was discovered. The actual attack started with compromising, getting access to another repository called Spotbugs, getting a maintainer's personal access token that allowed them to gain access to that repository, targeting someone else who was a maintainer on there to steal that maintainer's personal access token, which was also the personal access token for maintaining the review dog action setup. So their personal access token was first lost through another repo, used to attack review dog action setup. The way it got the TJ Actions has a dependency with review dogs. So if you run the action, it'll pull in the review dogs. And the target of this all was trying to compromise Coinbase and link the keys for accessing Coinbase. So it was a very targeted attack at Coinbase. Wow. And what happened in the meantime, though, is there was a period of about 3 days where if you were using TJ Actions actively in your development and you had secret keys that were part of that, your secret keys were compromised and you need to go back and clear those out, remove them, And so there's thousands of affected repositories who ended up using TJ actions during that timescale. So now the quiz portion. What's the CVSS score?
Well, I'd say, Roman, that's a pretty amazing set of chain vulnerabilities that were exploited. And I don't know how many transactions are done a day on Coinbase, but I bet it's billions of dollars. So this is a high value target for sure.
It was absolutely a high value target that they were after, and a lot of other repositories just got kind of caught up in that compromise.
Yeah. Okay, who's going to go first here? I don't want to give away my guess. So.
Price is Right's rules, closest without going over.
Okay, great. So Milton, you're our guest, so why don't you go first?
Yeah, I feel like there were so many triggers and buzzwords in there. It would be hard to imagine that this isn't just an 11 out of a 10 scale. But maybe that's the psychology, and you chose this because it's not a 10, and actually it's an 8 or person. No, but I'm gonna stick with, I don't know, 9, 8.
9, 8. Okay,
9,
you're
8.
not thinking about the Price is Right rules, but we'll see. Maybe you're right here. So, how about you, Eric?
I agree with Milton.
Well, you got to pick a different number. We need a winner.
You can't pick exactly the same number. You have to pick a different number. Price is Right rules.
9-7.
9-7. Okay. Well, I'm going to go 9-6 then. That's easy.
You're going to go 9-6. Oh, this is where that buzzer kicks in and says you all went over.
Oh, no. We all lost.
Wow. It was the
It
reverse
was
psychology thing.
8.6.
What is it?
An 8.6.
8.6.
And I think where I think there's an interesting connection here into the SBOM discussion that we can switch over into is most of the time your SBOM discussion is looking at your SBOM or for the software that goes in the end product. That's what the FDA wants to know. This is a case of, this is an SBOM related to the tools you're using for your build process, which don't go into your final SBOM. They're just like the tools that you're using. And so it's another thing that you have to be conscious of. You shouldn't just be thinking about vulnerabilities from the software that go into your end product, but also the open source software you're using to build that end product.
Yeah, I guess that's where automotive has a step up on medical. 21434 requires risk assessment of software tools used in the process.
And I've seen that, and I've always sort of, undervalued it, I'm sure. And in this case, was this a build tool, or was it like just a tool in the environment? I didn't quite catch that.
It is. So in GitHub, you have actions. So when you do a commit to a repository there, you can trigger actions based upon certain commits. So those actions in this case would be to check for what files have changed within. And so you can trigger other operations based upon what had changed, as an example there. So it's specific to the actions mechanism inside GitHub, which is very commonly used for kind of continuous improvement, continuous development processes.
Mm-hmm.
Very much
Great.
so.
And Roman, that's it's up to GitHub. It's up to Microsoft to fix that, I guess.
There were many people involved. The compromised repositories were independent repos, so the maintainers were very active in tracking down, fixing those accounts. GitHub helped in looking at the personal access tokens and tracking those down in terms of who was the contributor whose personal access token was compromised to enable this kind of sequence of events to happen. So GitHub's been able to change that. So, and then there were several external research groups. Wiz was involved, Unit 42 from Palo Alto Networks was involved in terms of kind of tracking down like what was the root cause of this attack.
Interesting. Well, good. That's a great one, Roman. Very, very good example there. So, Roman, do you want to do the other two, or should we get into the SBOM discussion? I think that one took a little bit of time.
Let's jump into the SBOM discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I think, Milton, you've got lots of insights on this, as we kind of had discussed before the call, and SBOMs analysis, SBOMs themselves are required for any medical device that is being submitted for a market pathways request to the FDA. So it's critically important here, and obviously therefore very relevant to what we're talking about here today. But Milton, tell us, what do you think? What's your sense about SBOMs, and the sort of vulnerabilities that they find and process that you use to go about through, going to figure out what are the vulnerabilities and so on? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah. SBOMs, I think of it as, well, first I should back up and say so that my company has spent some time basically building an SBOM vulnerability management tool. And through that, we sort of learned, anytime you have to implement something in something, you learn all about it. And now I feel like I'm in possession of all these dirty secrets of SBOM. And anytime the topic comes up, it normally comes up in the context of, motherhood and apple pie. And I feel like I have all these secrets, and I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but I feel like this is a lovely, forum right here to rain on the SBOM parade or CVE parade. And I just in terms of, at broad strokes would be, okay, just to take a quick, when we say CVEs, these are vulnerabilities that are captured by the National Vulnerability Database. And these are the vulnerabilities to elements within an SBOM. So how many CVEs are there? Maybe like a reverse quiz. Does anybody have an idea of approximately how many CVEs have been reported to date?
You mean total for all time, Milton, or this
Lifetime
year?
of the database.
All time.
Total in the database.
I'm going to guess 100,000.
I would guess.
All right, I'll jump in there with
100,001.
Go ahead.
I'm still playing Price is Right rules, but
Yeah,
Eric
there you
now
go,
is going to
exactly.
say 100,002 or go with 1.
I'm going to say 125,000.
All right, so we're at 289,000 right now.
Wow.
This started back in the beginning, first month on January of 2015. There were 3 CVEs in January, and that's when it began. And that first year, it got about like 6,400. Last year, 2024, the total was about 40,000. How many are getting reported per day? There's about 140, I believe it is, that is getting reported per day, kind of roughly on average. Out of those, the reviewers of the CVEs, they're getting about 90 done a day. So that means that every day that goes by, we're sort of falling behind on the number of CVEs that are in backlog. And right now in backlog, I think there is, I forget the precise number, but it's something like 7,400, something around there, or 7,600. Yeah, so there's a lot's pouring in. It's not getting resolved very quickly, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't even say resolved. Just looked at, just initially, treated for should it be in the database. Let's see, what else can I say? I can say that the number of CPE names, which is the vendor, the version, the product, there's about 1.3 million CPE names. So for each CVE, it goes against a CPE name. So you have about 300,000 vulnerabilities going about 1.4, like 4-to-1 ratio, roughly.
Wow.
So, with this type of universal data collecting activity, across the globe, open sourced, anyone can enter one. The data is about the quality you would expect, which is to say that it really needs cleaning up. So in a typical, say, Linux of moderate complexity SBOM, you might have like 2,600 CVEs typically coming out of that you actually that pass all your filters for being relevant to your SBOM, but only about 1 to 2% of those, or about 40, are actually things that you are vulnerable to. So you're only really worried about, say, 40 out of 2,600.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the wheat chaff ratio.
But you got to weed through the 2600 to figure out the 40 that are relevant.
Exactly. And by doing that, it's not a trivial task. Some of the descriptions in these things are multiple pages long. You know, they include log dumps, and trying to understand whether or not you're subject to them it's not just high art, it's highly technical.
And Milton, do you find that they don't, for the ones that don't apply, the chaff, so to speak, it's because the implementation doesn't utilize that feature? It's maybe part of a bigger library, and the call's not being made to that particular function, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a whole long list of most of your justifications for the ones that don't apply are, we aren't using it in that way, or we don't use it, or that's not a feature that we use.
Mhm.
So some combination of that.
Like a big
And
Linux
what that suggests,
implementation might have a bunch of like built-in utilities that are just there because that's what Linux comes with as a default, but you're not using them. And so it's a question of, should you remove them from your build?
right. And really there's a different package for the Linux kernel, distinct from, say, Debian or Ubuntu.
Mhm.
So there's like, I think those are the three package owners in the Linux space right now. That raises the notion of package owners. So in the beginning, anybody could enter a CVE and it would go, straight into the database with a little filter, really. And now there are CNAs that are which are CVE numbering authorities, which are coming into the picture. And these would be, agencies, companies, open source, they come from all stripes, and they say, hey, we want to own, the Linux kernel, for example, goes to kernel.org. And then they are now able to sort of filter and triage the CVEs being submitted in a more proactive way.
So that's helpful to the backlog that's growing, like you were talking about earlier, having these organizations pitch in, so to speak.
I think it's definitely going to increase the quality of the vulnerability information. There's maybe some concern that now there's an additional level that it can be disputed at, particularly if it's, say, a commercial company and they want to be kind of prohibitive. So there's a bit of a delicate balance there with CVE.org.
Got it.
Yeah. So how does there must be a prioritization process there, because you just waited. If it was a first in, first out process, the vulnerability we were talking about earlier today, that got published as a CISA alert in a matter of days of discovery of being reported. So it's a high enough vulnerability that it gets out there. So how is that up to each of those maintainers to do their own prioritization?
It's a bit of a process. I believe it goes to the maintainers first, and then it goes to NIST. I know that NIST recently released a statement saying, currently we are prioritizing analysis of the most significant vulnerabilities. In addition, we're working with our agency partners to bring on more support for analyzing, and have reassigned NIST staff to this task as well, which is interesting in light of recent NIST, if you follow the news, changes to the organization.
Milton, then you've got experience with multiple different types of operating systems. Can you comment a little bit about one versus the other in terms of generating the SBOM and trying to determine is there a vulnerability really applicable or not?
Yeah, I can sort of, we've worked a bit or struggled a bit, I guess I would say, with different operating systems, not just variants of Linux, although, for example, say QNX, which is kind of a high security operating system by BlackBerry. Yeah, one of the challenges there is that if you're using them, they're a variant of, they took a certain release of Linux and then have reversioned each of the elements of it. So it's very difficult to know what's underneath their bash, or any of their functions, their top. So that sort of hints at this problem that it's difficult to know what to name something within the database. And if you just arbitrarily, do your best and come up with the best name and the best version you can find that you think is right, is the rest of the world also doing or using that same, name and version number? So there's a potential for defects to go in under slightly different names and versions, and for the complete picture to be difficult to see.
So this could be a fork of a open source GitHub repository that someone's created and made their own customizations, lives under a different name, but the SBOMs may not be tracking that fork process as well. Because
Correct.
they might
And
have a
so,
different
for
name.
example, exactly, and I don't mean to pick on BlackBerry, but just as an example of the challenge here. So if you think Linux kernel has about 2,200 CVEs, or at least they did as of like 2 weeks ago. BlackBerry's QNX, and in particular, I chose a QNX for medical, which is a particularly secure version of it. There's 1 CVE.
Wow.
Reported for all time.
Wow.
So somewhere between 2,200 and 1, and so that's a problem with renaming things. Also, let's say, for example, Windows. Windows 11 has 599 CVEs reported against it. And you can either conclude that people aren't reporting CVEs, or they're not reporting them against the correct thing. You can see that against Windows altogether, there's about 21,000 CVEs open. So 599 to 21,000, and within Windows, alternative sub products that you might need to aggregate in order to see the CVEs are things like the PowerShell. Like, that's a different product. So if you have a vulnerability associated with that, it could end up reported against PowerShell.
Yeah.
Same for remote viewer or rich text box control. So you could get these defects, and they're just smattered all about the product space, very sort of willy-nilly.
And Milton, what's your advice for people? We have just a couple more minutes left here. In terms of when they're, dealing with the SBOM and making sure that, they found everything that's already reported, but maybe it's hard to address anything that might be there, but maybe it's not properly reported somehow.
Yeah, I think the net story. The reason I don't normally let most of this out is because you can end up being kind of a Debbie Downer pretty quickly, and this is a good effort in the world, and there's nothing else to replace it. So the only option is really to go forward and get better. Yeah, so I mean, is it going to really point out vulnerabilities that you have in the wild in your product? It's not quite there yet, but it's improving every day.
Yeah. And I think, it is a good effort. And, the NIST vulnerability database is one of the best databases out there for sure. There's no doubt about that. And then it's about making sure, you're able to have, I think, as complete an SBOM as possible. That can be a little bit tricky sometimes if you got binaries from third-party sources, right? You don't always know what's in there. Sometimes you're relying on the vendor in that case. And then it's about the disposition of anything that's found, right? And figuring out, like we said earlier, does it apply or doesn't it? And do you need to do something about it?
Right. Exactly. So it's still a very complex space, even with this great help of and the best efforts of many agencies trying to collect the information and make it available. I think in terms of its openness and transparency, it's one of the best efforts of this type that I've seen maybe ever.
Yeah.
So
I think
it's a hard problem.
Ultimately,
go ahead.
Super hard
that
problem.
effort, it's a hard problem to deal with, but without that information and the organization of maintaining a database in CVEs, it would be a lot more difficult to figure out how to close those vulnerabilities. So it's absolutely made systems more secure, and it just requires everybody to be involved. because you just need to know, like, you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to look at the vulnerabilities, and that's part of the development process. That's okay. Plan for it. And you'll be okay.
Well, Roman, thank you. And Milton, I'm just going to wrap us up here. I looked at the top hacks in terms of financial impact that are related to supply chain attacks. In terms of, we say supply chain, we mean software here. NotPetya 2017 was a destructive attack that had billions of impact. The Change Healthcare hack, also supply chain related, billions of impact. And then if we go back a little bit, Equifax, unpatched Apache struts. That was a vulnerability that was known. The analysis hadn't been done in a thorough way in their systems to know that it was there and needed to be fixed. Another one that had billions of impacts. And then SolarWinds, one that in 2021 led to a presidential order that made SBOMs a priority. So there has been, this history of supply chain attacks, with very significant consequence. So with that, I'd like to thank Roman, Eric, Milton. Thanks for being our special guest this week. It was really great to have you, and thanks for all the insights. And I'd say thanks to everyone who's joined.